Please welcome Jim Jarmusch. And now, please join me in welcoming the legendary Martin Scorsese.
Jim, thank you for doing this. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a preference?
I'm fine over here. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we don't have a lot of time. I think I could talk for ask 5 hours worth of questions about each film. But before I ask anything, I just want to say that you probably all feel the same way, but this man's presence on this planet, his depth of knowledge of cinema, his enthusiasm, and of course his work has had a very deep effect on my life, and I'm sure we all feel that way, but it's a great privilege.
Thank you.
To talk to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
I want to start just talking a little bit about Italian American, which we saw the opening sequence from, which is an incredible film. I wrote down just a few. I mean, it's a simple film that seems to be a portrait of your family through your parents. But the themes in the film include parents, immigration, New York City, sauce, religion, the history of Elizabeth Street, love, Sicily, resentment, meatballs, marriage, work, class, history, money, survival, homemade vinegar. But there's so much in that film. I love this film. So I just wondered what was your initial, impetus for this?
Well, actually, it was a series, part of a series called A Nation of Immigrants, I think, for the bicentennial of America, 1976. And they were doing one on each ethnic group. And they asked me to do one on the Italians. And I felt that I didn't want to. I said I'd do it if I could do something that was not the usual, archival footage and that sort of thing. I said, well, probably the best thing to do would be just to have dinner with, in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, with my mother and father on Elizabeth Street. And my friend Mardik Martin and I, who came from NYU, also Mardik is Armenian, was born in Baghdad. He helped me write Mean Streets. He was one of the writers on Raging Bull and New York, New York, and that sort of thing. Mardik came from NYU, Haig Manoogian protege, and Mardik was good friends with them too. So he said, well, why don't we come out? So I'll come up with a few questions. And as you can see, what happened was that what you see from the very beginning was that's Lee Bobker of NYU on sound, and he just hits the sync light, and I figured I'd shoot a little footage for them to get warmed up, but ultimately what happened is that, naturally, she started directing it in a way, and then but what's interesting is that I figured, well, I'd ask these questions about how they got together, where they met, what they lived like, and as I made the film, as I was sitting there with them, it was only 3 hours on a Saturday and 3 hours on a Sunday, I began to realize I was still, maybe 29 or 30, 31 maybe. I just grown the beard too. My father got mad about the beard. And in fact, now I look at that film now, I'm older than my father is in that film right now. And I'm wearing glasses I didn't wear before. I shaved the beard, I look like him. I look like it's absolutely, and I began to see the relationship with the two of them and the life they had before me. You think of yourself, you're so self-centered and everything as a child, and especially being a sickly child, they gave you all the attention and that sort of thing. And I have an older brother, it was a big family. Not my mother and father. My father had 8 brothers and sisters. My mother had 8 brothers and sisters. So they realized as becoming American, they're Italian Americans. I'm sort of American Italian. If they understood not to have 8 or 9 kids in the tenements anymore, that they can have 2, maybe 3, And so I began to see the love story of the 42 years they've been married up to that point. My father died right at the 60th year of their marriage. And so I learned, I would ask one question, they'd go off. And I began to see this kind of double narration that was going on, this counterpoint arguing, and how one perceived what actually happened, and the other one perceived another thing. but I really got to know them as in a sense, two people who were in love.
Yeah, well, love is certainly a strong part of the film. There's one really beautiful moment in the film that I think informs some of your narrative work. There's a moment where your father is talking about his mother, your grandmother,
yeah.
and he says, she was really tough, she was a real whip. And there's a moment where the camera just stays there, and your mother, your father, and you are in the frame, you're not looking at each other, and it just hangs there, and it's a very, really emotional moment somehow.
It's, I left it that way because that's his personality. She was more outgoing. That's where the Goodfellas comes from, in the sense that she's the outgoing one, and my father's the one with like the more Sicilian baron, or a medieval, right is right, wrong is wrong, but one can negotiate with respect. With respect, we could talk. And he was tough. And that you see it. I'm glad you point that out, because that for me is one of the shakiest emotional moments for me to watch.
Yeah, it's a heavy moment. Insightful into your whole family.
And that led right into why I related to Kazan's films. Why I related to Waterfront and East of Eden, particularly. The fathers and the sons.
Right.
And not being able sometimes to be able to talk to your father. And the way James Dean is in East of Eden.
Yeah. Well, there's another great thing that leads to, in the beginning of the film, when your father is talking about your mother's presence on camera and almost directing her.
Yeah.
But then there's the scene in Goodfellas where your mother plays Joe Pesci's mother, and she's making food for him, Robert De Niro, I think someone else.
And Ray Liotta, yeah.
And Ray Liotta. And it's so naturalistic. She's the same character in Goodfellas as we see.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I grew up, people talk about the Italian-American neighborhood. You're downtown, you know what it is. Now it's kind of gone, but when I grew up there, it was still very much of a small little village life in a way. And a lot of the people are hardworking people. My mother and father, 40 years in the garment district working. But, there was that element of organized crime. There was that element of danger at times. And some family members just not making it, just going off the wrong way and not winding up alive anymore. And that doesn't mean the mothers didn't love the sons the same way. And so she doesn't care what her son does. He's home. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Let me give you some food. Where have you been for 3 nights? Oh, your friends, come on in. Don't worry, eat something.
She's not concerned that they just beat some guy.
No, she doesn't. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my mother there was a body in the trunk. I just said, your son is home. He's home. Cook some food. Bob is playing an Irish guy. Give him some potatoes and eggs with ketchup. That kind of stuff. It was a whole thing. And then they improvised everything. The only thing that was written was, did you see my painting? Which was from Nick Pileggi's mother. She had painted. That was her painting. And everything else was improvised with my mother saying, why don't you settle down? I said, I do. Why don't you get a nice girl and settle down? Joe says, I do. I get a nice girl every night. I settle down every night. She goes, no, I love you, Mom. And all of that went on with 2 cameras, and I just sat there. 2 cameras in a small little house in Astoria, I think, in Queens. And it's a very special thing. But she does love her son unequivocally.
And it's an interesting insight, too, just in your approach to actors, to get that kind of naturalistic performance from people. But there's also another thing I loved is when they talk about your grandfather who had a mustache, a big handlebar mustache, and then he shaved it off when he was away, and when he came back, the children saw him, and they burst into tears. Which I loved.
Well, he went away to work. He was laborers,
And I also learned from that film, too, that we have something strange in common. Both our mothers have fraternal twin brothers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my mom, too.
Oh, wow.
But I could talk about this film forever because...
But Jim, don't you think, though, what I learned there, though, was that you can hold a camera on a person, they talk, they tell the story. It's like the old person, I don't know, it goes back to, it's primeval. You sit the person around a campfire, tells you a story, and in a way, the camera doesn't necessarily get in the way, it's the person's face. And you fade out, fade in if you want, and all the great camera moves in the world not necessary in a way. And that freed me up, that film, for doing certain dramatic scenes in Raging Bull, actually. Some of not the fight scenes, but the dialogue scenes. That sort of freed me up from a kind of feeling we had to be more formal with tracking and that sort of stuff.
Well, that leads me to another subject, which is style being something which delivers something emotional. I think another film that I've loved so much, My Voyage to Italy, which they showed excerpts from Rossellini's Open City, is such a beautiful film. People probably have seen it, but you must see this film. But you say, I think it's over the sequence of Visconti's Senso, over the Verdi opera sequence. You say, you're talking about the film particularly, but you say, style is everything. And I assume when I watched this film several times, that really hits me because to me style is what differentiates, it's what is personal expression. Mm-hmm. But the style delivers something. And I assume you were talking not just about Visconti and not just about that film, but about yourself and your mm-hmm. own work. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted you to talk loosely a little bit about style and how, for me, style delivering something emotional equals a masterpiece of cinema. And then you get Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and Goodfellas and all of your films. So this is very, can I be a little more vague?
I was going to say, help me out here.
But style being, all right, I'll move on.
But the thing is, the style, again, it's exactly the point. It's the thing of, you can hold that camera, two people talking, two rode together, Jimmy Stewart and Richard Widmark, talking in the riverbank. I always talk about that scene. The camera just held and held, and they talked, and suddenly it was like a documentary from 1870. You know, you got to know these two guys and what they were really thinking and what they felt like. And I learned that. Then again, seeing a lot of the Italian cinema, I was moved by their style, in a way, emotionally moved. And I think somehow it filtered through the work of what I saw of Cassavetes, and in some way there's been I guess the only thing I can try to answer is that there's been a kind of struggle between maybe three different styles or something. It's almost like a kind of American-European, one group pulling me, the other group pulling me, and sometimes I'll say, no, this is going to be flat, it's going to be straight, and I can't help moving the camera a little bit, or in one film, particularly King of Comedy, I felt almost, I felt like I was tied down. I wanted to make it hermetically sealed, like a television frame, where Jerry couldn't get out of the frame, Rupert couldn't get out of the frame, Sandra Bernhardt, they were all stuck with each other on TV, you know? And I didn't want any camera moves, I didn't want, the composition was a certain, but I found that maybe I wasn't doing enough. But then is that the issue, Jim, of like, do you say, look at me, look at all the style, just for style's sake, you know? This is a constant battle in my mind with this sort of thing. But sometimes you get to settle. And it's the films you watch, the films you see. I just finally saw these great films by, it's taken 40 years, but I saw 5 of them by this Japanese director, Naruse. Have you seen any?
Yes.
Jesus. Floating Clouds.
Yes.
The Sound of the Mountain. Stunning. And emotionally so powerful. We're weeping in our screening room afterwards. And again, the style seems very simple. Other times, a woman ascends the stairs, widescreen, black and white, editing.
That's my favorite. Yeah.
You know, it's just an extraordinary thing. And it's a matter of what, I was going to say that watching Naruse or watching Close Up by Kiarostami, have you seen that one?
Yes.
Close, yeah. That, for me, refocused my whole way of thinking, watching this film Close Up. You must see this thing. It's on DVD, Kiarostami, Iranian film. That it hit me as strongly as watching for the first time. I can't say for the first time because I was 5 years old when I saw neorealist films for the first time, but has that emotional impact, I feel. And so I find myself not watching modern films as much as possible. Again, older stuff. And if I'm looking at more modern films, they're usually independent or they're usually Southeast Asian or Iranian or that sort of thing. And trying to focus on and not get hung up, because I think style now is, I don't know what style is anymore in the world of now the availability of the image, being able to manipulate the image in such a way where the image goes into digital video. And a kid told me a couple of years ago, I saw this great film last night on my computer. I said, what was it? Sweet Smell of Success. I said, you saw it on your computer? You know? And now they're talking about being put on iPods. I mean, so is that cinema. So in a sense, it's almost like it's frightening to think of style and to be influenced by it, and it's almost have to go back to basics. And style for me, when you say style, I think of like some of Visconti or Incenso, or particularly The Leopard, or Minnelli's camera moves, crane moves, and that sort of thing. And there's been that struggle back and forth, the simplicity or the complexity.
It's funny that you said, because I could see almost a connection, like a combination of Cassavetes with Visconti.
I'm trying.
It seemed like diametrically
I know.
Do you know the director Panahi, Iranian director? The Circle.
Yes, The Circle, excellent. Yeah.
Crimson Gold was beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
But getting to, like, your work is interspersed with these documentary films, with your fictional feature films. Now, when you're making a feature film, you have a lot of control. The style is sort of designed as you approach the project in every shot. Mm-hmm. How does that work for you with documentary? When does that style become? Does the material lead you to it rather than you leading the material?
It's definitely the material. The material leads me to it. There's no doubt. I think in the Italian American was one of the first ones I did, and that was my mother and father, and it was ultimately about myself. It's so personal that as you could, that's why we always show the first part of the film, because you could see that she's leading me through. They begin to take me through, and they make the film in a sense. And I learn from them, tell stories, and that's everything from them. And then in the case of the other films, it's really the music which leads me. The music takes me, and in the case of Last Waltz or particularly the Dylan film, it's the obsession with the music, really. And the music begins to tell a story. In The Last Waltz, you had a basic story. It was Robbie Robertson's idea that, of course, it was the end of the group, the band, and they were going to have a final concert, and they were going to have all these other groups, wonderful people there, from Neil Young to Muddy Waters, Joni Mitchell, everybody, Bob Dylan. And I began to understand, at that time, I was just discovering this music. In other words, rock and roll, I still had my 78 of, Rip It Up or Ready Teddy, Little Richard, and Roll Over Beethoven on 78s, and Sun Records, I still have my 78s. So I didn't know where that music really came from. And it's been a long process of discovery, but in Last Waltz, Robbie was able to show his influences, the influences of the band. And that's how that film was structured, like a tapestry in a sense of this American music and where all the influences came from. In Dylan, it was something else. There was years of footage there. It took 4 years to put together. A wonderful editor, David Tedeschi, worked on it with me. And between finishing Gangs of New York and doing Aviator and shooting this new film, we had to find the story in the footage. But the music led us to that. And then the music led us to the artist. And then what's the obligation of the artist? To himself or to others?
No, you layered in the whole historical context in such a beautiful, strong way. I read that the first time you met Dylan was backstage or at some time around filming The Last Waltz, and that he talked to you about Fassbinder's film, one of my favorite Fassbinder film, Beware of the Holy Whore.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what was that like? How did that?
Well, that was like this. That was like, I didn't know. I mean, I also loved the band, I loved Dylan, but I didn't know, I knew they were breaking up, but I didn't understand. They had the grace not to let me in on their own issues and problems. And so they were a little hesitant. It was very hard, I think, for Robbie and everybody to pull all those people together on the stage. And there was, I think, some negotiating to get Dylan to appear and that sort of thing. So it was kind of tense at times. And we shot 7 cameras, 35 millimeter, for 7 hours at the concert. And Dylan finally came out, and I was allowed to shoot 4 of his songs, not the others, but 4. And so afterwards, there was a little party, and afterwards, I was introduced to him, and he said, he looked at me and said, "Do you know about this guy Fassbinder?" I said, "Yeah, Merchant of Four Seasons." He says, "Yeah." I said, "Beware of the Holy Whore. Look at that." I said, "Okay." That was it.
Good taste.
That was it.
That was it.
That was it. Then over the years, I saw him backstage a few times, say hello and that sort of stuff. And but I never really had hang out with Bob. I don't
know.
I don't know. You know, I mean, these guys, and they'd say Bob. I said, Bob who? Bob. Oh, okay, you know him that well. All right.
And while we're on music, do you, when you're working, do you listen to music that is going to inspire or is connected to a project you're working on, or are you inspired by, like what are you listening to now? You know,
the problem, yeah,
the Arctic Monkeys, or
no, the Arctic Monkeys aren't bad. Radiohead, I thought was pretty good. Radiohead's pretty good. You know, which one?
Hip hop, any kind?
No, hip hop, I lost it. I just don't get it. I got King of Rock, right? Those guys was the original King of. Well, no.
Run DMC.
Run DMC, yeah, Run DMC. That first album, that's amazing. But then after that, I couldn't follow it, and I just have to. I'm embarrassed, but I don't know what else to say. I like the sound of it, the whole thing, but I don't get it. I mean, and so. I have to go to melody.
Your name checked in a lot of hip hop.
Did I really?
Yeah, a lot of references to you and your work. But anyway.
Really?
Yeah.
You're kidding, because I listen to it and I get it. My wife tells me it's fantastic. I'm listening. I'm going, yeah. I mean, oh God, these guys are great. But I don't listen to. I listen to more melodic things to a certain extent. There's a one piece we're hoping to use in a new film called Thief's Theme. With the guy named Nas, I think, is pretty interesting.
Nas,
yeah. And you know, and there's a number of things like that. But this film I made now, The Departed, it's called. It takes place in Boston. It's the first film I made that takes place in the quote modern world in 20 years. So I really don't even know what people like wear and stuff. No, seriously, it's like weird. I don't know. So that's what the cops look like. Well, that's the cop on the street. The cop in the office is like, this is different from New York. I said, I don't get it. But what I listen to is, you know, it's anything from Hank Williams to as I say, Radiohead. It just is an enormous amount of stuff.
And Mahler, you like classical
Mahler,
music?
yeah, definitely. And oh God, for Gangs of New York, it was even I must admit, for Gangs of New York, it was ridiculous. But we had Martha von Flotow, you know, the Flotow. It's kind of an operetta, very famous. The 19th century, very famous. Very light. But that came out of Gangs of New York, came out, and then the Irish and Scotch music for the period, but the mixing with the African rhythms, the Irish and Scotch music, and then we began to realize, of course, American music. And this is all a process of discovery, and the idea of tap dancing coming out of the 5 points as an art form, a combination of clog dancing and African rhythm, all this mixed together. And so all of this is very exciting. We had Peter Gabriel, Howard Shore, Robbie Robertson on that. Elmer Bernstein had started it. But the music was very important there. So, I keep going back to Dylan. I keep going back to Van Morrison, and for kind of comfort and
a little bit about documentaries as a form, which is very, very loose in a way. But Godard said once somewhere something like, in the future, the nightly news will be reenacted. And then I read a quote from you that said, the news is now pure entertainment. And you talk also about recording versus interpreting.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, now we're at you've talked a lot about historical context of documentaries and styles. There's a beautiful thing you said as an example about a British film where you said class-oriented, you were talking about Tony Richardson, Lindsay Anderson, Carol Rice, etc. Class-oriented documentary approach, quote, the photography itself, because of the evenness of the British light, had something special about it. These films took that kind of naturalism to a new level.
Yeah.
I just thought that was such an amazing observation, that the quality, because I'm always very susceptible to the difference in light, whether you're in Portugal or Southern California. But that whole thing about form and style, I don't know.
I was going to ask.
Can I get a little more vague here?
I was going to ask you though, because it's interesting. I mean, the idea, the impulse was always, imagine you have a camera and you could get pictures that move. And what's the first thing you want to do? Let's go out and shoot the, let's go to 14th Street and shoot the cars going by. You know, and what is the impulse? The impulse is to record that, or do you create something dramatic that is interpreted? In other words, the moment you put that camera down, you're interpreting how the audience is going to see that image of the car going by. So, in a funny way, the impulse is, that's why for me, at a certain point, as far as being moved, being human expression. There's no difference for me between what they call a documentary and a narrative film. There isn't, and I think I've been trying to, I guess, as I say, between the European styles and the American style, but also trying to get that kind of truth that I felt, that I feel in certain, when you see a certain documentary, you look at an actor's face, or you look at George Wallace's face in Crisis, or you see Bobby Kennedy on the phone in Crisis, the look, how he moves, and that body line. I've been trying to get that sort of thing on film, because there's an honesty, there's a truth, there's an authenticity, I should say. I don't know what the truth is, but there's an authenticity there. But I think once that camera came out, the first thing was to record, and then somebody said, "Hey, let's create the explosion of Mount Etna," and that'll be. So all of a sudden they decided to interpret, and then theatrical interpretation. And so for me, the line gets blurred. But there's no doubt for me that the news now, of course, as we all know in this country, in terms of in general television, general images on television, it's pure entertainment. So.
Well, documentaries were at some point viable commercially in like the 60s.
Oh, that's right. You would go and see Salesmen at a Saturday night, or Titicut Follies, I was saying, Fred Wiseman documentary.
And then that disappeared.
Yeah.
And now it's back, and that's, and now there's a corporate media that seems to suppress or deny ideas and information,
right.
And therefore people still want it. So these films, I can't distinguish corporate media from corporate government at this stage.
I agree. Yeah.
But people need those.
I agree. That's where the documentary is so important now. You're right.
Jim and Marty, I am loath to cut this conversation off, so if we want to have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sorry.
Oh, damn. Well, I would just like to refer to a quote that I love, because your love of cinema is so deep and your knowledge is so deep, and everyone has to see these films, My Voyage to Italy and A Personal Journey Through American Movies, and I'm hoping there are going to be more. I want the journey through Iranian, Japanese, French, British,
We're trying
Polish
for the British one next, yeah.
But anyway, you said in one of those films, as with heroin, the antidote to film is more film.
Yeah.
Which I can identify with.
Yeah.
So it's not really a question, but I don't know. Your love of cinema is so infectious and valuable, and aside from your incredible work.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know.
I think that says it all.
It's not a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim.